Cuphead is a super hard game with a beautiful art style, so in this video I'm going to get every single achievement in both the base game and DLC, as well as get every single S rank, because why not? First on my to-do list is to play through the game, beginning with Cuphead and Mugman risking their souls at the Devil's Casino. They strike a deal to collect soul contracts from debtors in a bid to save their lives. After that juicy plot, I went straight into the tutorial where I figured out the controls as well as collected my first coin. This apple dude here also gave me 3 coins, which I promptly used to buy an item from the shop. I got the smoke bomb charm, which allows you to dash through enemies without getting hurt. And with that, I went straight into my first boss battle. The root pack consists of 3 phases, all of which are pretty easy given that it's one of the first bosses. All I had to do was jump over this potato guy's dirtball attacks, dodge the crying onion's tears, and avoid the carrot missiles while being sure to watch out for his laser beam attack. After just a few attempts, I secured the victory and received my first achievement for defeating a boss. The next boss that I tackled was Ribby and Croaks, which was definitely a step up in difficulty. One of the most frustrating attacks for me was this fan move, as it really threw off my movement while trying to dodge the projectiles. The final phase was also a challenge, as I had to be ready for any of the 3 randomized attacks. After some persistence and learning all of the different attacks, I was able to fight my way through the frog duo. I even defeated them with an extra special move, which granted me with the ceramic strike achievement. While exploring Aisle 1, I found this museum full of ghosts. At first, I was trying to shoot them, but I quickly discovered that I had to parry them instead. While doing so, I got the parry persistence achievement for completing 20 parries. After fighting off all of the ghosts, I was rewarded with my first super art. This will be really helpful for future boss fights. I decided to tackle my first run and gun level next. Each run and gun level has 5 coins, and I want to be sure to collect them all since there's an achievement for getting every coin in the game. Luckily, none of the coins in this level were too hard to find, and after just a few attempts, I managed to get to the end of the level with all 5 coins. I felt like fighting another boss, so this time I went for Goopy Le Grande. This is one of the first bosses in the game, so all of its attack patterns were pretty straightforward, and I was able to get the knockout after just a few attempts. But just as I was finally starting to get used to Cuphead's movements, I discovered my first plane level. This level was super hard at first because of just how many things were flying my way that I had to avoid. I could also never seem to get the timing right to dodge the bull attack, which was really frustrating. After some persistence, I was able to fight my way to the final phase, which has some of my favorite animations in the game. I'm not going to lie though, the UFO attacks were pretty infuriating, but in the end, I was still able to secure the knockout. Next up, I decided to take on Aisle 1's second run and gun level. I did find this one a bit harder than the first one, but after getting familiar with the level, I was able to make my way to the end, again being sure to collect all 5 coins. With that, I made my way to the final boss on Aisle 1. The first phase was really difficult because of just how many enemies were spawning at once. And this wouldn't be too bad on its own, but I also had to keep my eye on the flower's movements and be sure to dodge his attacks as well. My favorite part of this boss is definitely the final phase, where I had to dodge the vines that take over the platforms. And after knocking out this boss, I was rewarded with the Walk in the Park achievement for defeating every boss on Aisle 1. Before moving on to Aisle 2, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything, and while doing so, I found a coin hidden in the forest. And I also discovered a shortcut, which rewarded me with the Cutting Corners achievement. Moving on to Aisle 2, the first boss that I tackled was Baroness von Bonbon. My main struggle with this boss is that it has a lot of RNG, since any of the 5 mini-bosses can spawn from the castle. If I had to rank them from easiest to hardest, I would start with the Gumball Machine. Then next, I would probably say the candy corn looking guy, then the Jawbreaker, the Waffle, and the hardest is definitely the Muffin, just because of how annoying the timing feels. It felt like no matter when I jumped, I would still end up getting hurt. But after getting through the mini bosses, I was greeted with the final phase. I had to stay sharp and alert to dodge the attacks. Luckily, the final phase was short, making it easier to land the knockout. The next boss was another flying level, and this time it was in a super cool desert theme. All of the attacks felt super chaotic at first, especially the puppet attack where I kept dying over and over again. Eventually I made my way to the final phase, which looked really intimidating at first, but the patterns were actually pretty simple once I got the hang of it, so I was able to get the knockout. The next boss was Beppy the Clown. The first phase was easy enough, but further into the level I kept dying from the super annoying horseshoe attacks. Fortunately I got the spread gun, which allowed me to deal a lot more damage and get through the boss much faster. And with less time to get hurt, I pulled off a successful run and defeated the boss. Next I moved on to a run and gun level with a super cool gravity switching mechanic. Walking on the ceiling felt strange initially, but after getting used to it, I successfully reached the end of the level with all 5 coins. Taking on Grim Matchstick was my next challenge. The randomized cloud platforms added a layer of difficulty, making this boss quite a handful. Dealing with the unpredictable flame minions was frustrating, as they often caught me off guard with their random jump heights. But amidst the struggle, the captivating hand-drawing art in Cuphead kept me engaged and fascinated. It's mind-blowing to think that all of the animations in Cuphead were meticulously drawn by hand. Even the tower in the background of this boss fight was a real model crafted by the developers. Grim Matchstick proved to be one of the toughest bosses so far, but with just 1 hit point left, I managed to secure the knockout. I stumbled upon another museum, and sure enough, it was brimming with ghosts. While I was busy parrying them, I hit a milestone and unlocked the parry performance achievement for completing 100 parries. After I took care of all of the ghosts, I got my second super art, which lets me go invincible for a short time. I proceeded to the second run and gun level on aisle 2, and to my delight, I managed to breeze through it while being sure to collect all 5 coins. I should have savored the easier run and gun level while it lasted, because the final boss on aisle 2 was going to be a tough one. The screen was flooded with a crazy number of projectiles and enemies to dodge, making it a real tough challenge. After dying over and over again, I started making some headway into the later stages of the fight. The orbiting egg attack was a bit annoying, but fortunately not too tricky to avoid. The real challenge hit in the final phase with seemingly no safe spot on the screen. But after numerous attempts, I just barely scraped by with only 1 HP left, managing to secure the knockout. And to top it off, I scored the Day at the Fair achievement for taking down every boss on aisle 2. Moving on to aisle 3, the first boss that I went for was Rumor Honeybottoms. I know a lot of people think this boss isn't too hard, but I really struggled mainly due to the moving platforms. I kept trying, and I slowly developed strategies for each of the attacks. And after about 45 minutes of attempts, I finally managed to get the knockout. The next boss was Captain Brinnybeard. Most of the attacks were pretty easy to dodge, but what made this boss really challenging for me was the barrel at the top of the screen that dropped whenever I went underneath it. I had to be sure to always pay attention to it, otherwise I would get put in a tricky spot and end up taking damage. Once I developed this strategy, the boss became a lot easier and the knockout came shortly after. Taking a short break from bosses, I decided to do a run and gun level next. Making my way through the level, I had to be patient to avoid the lobster's attacks. The final part of the level was pretty tricky, as I had to parry the anchor on top of this octopus's head to make him shoot the rocks. If I didn't parry in time, the octopus would sink into the water and I would end up getting hurt. And this wouldn't be too hard on its own, but there were so many projectiles coming my way at the same time that I kept dying to. Eventually though, I managed to get a good run where I collected all 5 coins and made my way to the very end of the level. I found the third and final museum, and while parrying the ghosts, I got the bouncing ball achievement for parrying 5 times before hitting the ground. After fending off all of the ghosts, I was rewarded with the last of the 3 super arts, which also came with its own achievement. With that, it was time to battle some more bosses, and the next one that I went for was Werner Warman. This boss was way easier for me than any of the other aisle 3 bosses that I've defeated so far. The first phase was a breeze, as all of the attacks were easy enough to dodge. The second phase did pick up the difficulty though, as I had to maneuver from the upper and lower platforms, while being sure to dodge his flame attack, and also keeping my eye on the bottle cap saws. The final phase was really short, as I could deal a lot of damage using spread. I just had to pay attention to what side of the screen the cat's arm was going to come from, while also being sure to keep an eye on the other projectiles. And just like that, I was able to get the knockout in no time. I decided to do the final run and gun level next. The first section did pose some challenges, with these platforms that raised or lowered depending where I was standing, but I took my time and it wasn't too bad to get through. The next section confined me to this platform where I had to avoid all of the spawning enemies. From there it was a straight shot to the final section where I had to run away from this monster fast enough in order to reach the finish line. And after completing this level with all 5 coins, I was rewarded with the Coffers Full achievement for getting all of the coins in all of the run and gun levels. The next boss to fight was Dr. Cal's robot. Little did I know that this is one of the hardest fights in the game. The robot has attacks coming from his head, chest, and abdomen all at the same time. I had to destroy each part of the robot, but that didn't make it any easier since after destroying a body part, it gained a new attack. This made it so that there were so many different attack patterns that I had to learn, which made this boss really hard. And keep in mind, this is only the first phase. At least the second phase did let me breathe a little bit, with only bombs to dodge. But it was still difficult to deal damage to the robot's head while trying to avoid all of the bombs. The final phase is where it gets really crazy again, as it's essentially just a bullet hell. And after over an hour of attempts, I eventually made it to the final phase with 3 HP, which gave me the edge I needed to finally defeat this boss. Sally's stage play was the next boss that I went for, which was a nice break from that torture. All of the stages consisted of easy to predict attacks with consistent patterns, so it only took me about 10 minutes to get the knockout and collect her contract. Phantom Express also wasn't too hard of a boss fight once I got used to the moving platform gimmick. The first 2 phases were a breeze, but it did pick up once I got to the 3rd phase, as I had to keep my eye on which of the 2 lollipop looking guys were going to attack me. The last phase was also pretty difficult, just because of the amount of things on the screen that I had to pay attention to. But eventually I got a good run and got the knockout. The final boss I need to defeat on Aisle 3 is Calamaria. The first phase was manageable after learning all of the different attacks, but what made this boss really difficult is once she started turning me into stone. In the second phase, she spawns a bunch of eels which shoot tons of bullets. If I got turned into stone at the wrong time, there was no easy way to dodge them. To get around this, I tried to kill the eels right away to lessen the amount of bullets. And in the final phase, I was confined to this tight cavern where I had to dodge spike columns and her ghost attack. She still continued to turn me into stone, which made this part super hard. I had to be sure to line myself up so that even when I got turned into stone, I wouldn't be hurt. After developing these strategies and trying over and over again, I finally defeated this boss, which also granted me an achievement for defeating every boss on Aisle 3. The last boss to get through before taking on the devil himself is King Dice. In order to actually fight him though, I had to roll dice and make my way through the board game. Some of the spaces are safe spots, but the numbers 1 to 9 each resemble a boss that I'll have to defeat before I'm allowed to move on. I tried to roll as high as possible, as well as land on safe spots to avoid as many of the mini-bosses as possible. And I hate to admit this, but the last space before the finish line makes you start all over again from the beginning, and yeah, I landed on the space more times than I'd like to admit. Eventually, I made my way all the way to the end and could finally face King Dice himself. I then proceeded to die not 20 seconds later. And I made my way through the board once more, just to die to King Dice again. And again. And again. But eventually I made my way to the very end with still a good amount of health remaining, which gave me the advantage I needed to finally knock out King Dice. And this also gave me an achievement for completing the casino. Defeating King Dice granted me access to the devil. When I spoke to him, he wanted all of the soul contracts that I've collected, but I decided to fight him instead. His first phase had a lot of different attacks that I had to learn, which made it pretty difficult. And this goat transformation kept damaging me as the timing was super tight. And I also had to be sure to keep my eye on the purple minions that could come from either side of the screen. After finally getting a hang of all of the different attacks, I made my way to the next phase. This one was challenging as I was limited to 5 small platforms that kept lowering and raising. His hitbox is pretty big though, and using spread, I was able to deal a ton of damage. After about a half hour of attempts, I finally got on a good run. I made it to the final phase, which left me with only one small platform to maneuver on, but I was able to dodge the falling poker chips and get the knockout. And this granted me an achievement for defeating the devil. And this concluded the main storyline with Cuphead and Mugman freeing their souls from the devil. They also burned all of the soul contracts to free the bosses from the devil's grasp. With the main story wrapped up, I received an achievement for completing the game on normal. And I knew there was an alternate ending where I give in to the devil, so I went back and agreed to give him the soul contracts to see the alternate ending and get the selling out achievement. Despite finishing the main storyline and seeing both of the endings, I couldn't be any further from exploring all of the content in this amazing game. And at this point, I had a lot of coins saved up, so I used them to buy a bunch of different items in the shop. And with that, I decided to move on to the DLC next. This introduced a new playable character, Miss Chalice, as well as Isle 4, which is full of new and exciting bosses. While exploring the island, I discovered the King's Leap, which has this super fun parrying minigame. Upon completion, I was granted some coins, and then I made my way to my first boss battle. Moonshine Mob isn't too hard of a boss, but I was still getting used to Miss Chalice's moveset, which made it pretty challenging. In the first phase, I had to be sure to get rid of as many of the bombs as possible to make it easier to dodge the rest of the enemies. The second phase was easy once I finally remembered to use the invincibility roll. The third phase was the most difficult for me, as the Anteater's tongue attack seemed really chaotic, especially when trying to dodge the ball attacks that were bouncing around the screen at the same time. Eventually I made it to the very end, where I luckily wasn't tricked by the fake knockout sign. After shooting down the snail, I got the actual knockout, which granted me an achievement for defeating a boss with Miss Chalice. I then went back to the King's Leap, where I took on another one of the parrying mini-bosses. In this one, I had to fence this horse knight, which was a lot harder than the first of the King's challenges. My main struggle was just being patient, as the window to safely parry the horse was super small. But after learning when it was safe to attack or not, I was able to make my way through the challenge and claim victory. I then went on to tackle the only flying level in the DLC, Esther Winchester. This fight is absolutely insane with just how much stuff is on the screen at any given time. At first, I was struggling to even get through the first phase, and even when I did get to the second phase, it wasn't any easier as it's essentially a bullet hell. I made my way through to the third phase, which was a bit easier, but it went straight back to insane mode for the last phase. I had to weave in and out of these sausages, while also being sure to dodge the pepper attacks. The movement was really tight, and I died a fair amount of times in the last phase before eventually securing the knockout. I had some coins, so I went back to the shop where I bought the Heart Ring, Broken Relic, and Twist Up. Buying the Broken Relic unlocked the Gravestone puzzle, which is the way to access the DLC's secret boss. I talked to these mountain climbers who gave me clues on how to solve it. Using the clues that they gave me, I had to click on the correct gravestones in a certain order to solve the puzzle. After choosing to take a nap, I was greeted with the secret level where I had to fight the Angel and Demon. This boss is difficult as the location of the Angel and Demon changes depending on what direction I was looking. To make this boss less challenging, I used Twist Up so it was easier to deal damage. After defeating the boss, I was granted 3 achievements at once. The first one was for defeating the secret boss, the second for completing a level without getting hurt, and the third for defeating a boss using one of the DLC weapons since I was using Twist Up. Going back to the regular bosses, the next one I took on was the Howling Aces. This one was pretty easy for me until the entire screen started to flip directions, which made it really hard to dodge the attacks. But after trying over and over again, I finally started to get used to it and I was able to get the knockout. The next boss was Mortimer Freeze. The first phase wasn't too bad, as the wizard's attacks were pretty easy to dodge. It did pick up in the second phase with the fridge's fast-paced attacks. But like every boss, I just needed to keep practicing until eventually I started to get the hang of it. The last phase was difficult because of the moving platforms, but using the smoke bomb charm to dodge a lot of the attacks gave me the upper hand that I needed and I got the knockout. The last Isle 4 boss to take on is Glumstone the Giant. The first phase was annoying because of these stupid gnomes that kept hitting me. The second phase was pretty straightforward, with just this ball bouncing back and forth between his 2 hands. And as long as I didn't stand in one spot for too long, I was usually able to dodge the gnomes that were jumping around the screen. The final phase of this boss is easily one of my favorites in the entire game. You get thrown into the giant's stomach, and I think it's just such a bizarre and fun concept. In this phase, the skull platforms slowly disappear until eventually one of them sticks its tongue out, and once it does, you're able to parry it, which makes all of the platforms reappear. After getting the knockout, I was rewarded with an achievement for defeating every boss on Isle 4. The last fight I had to take on was Chef Saltbaker, who is the final boss of the DLC. In his first phase, he attacks you with any of his 4 food attacks. What makes it hard though is that this fireball is constantly dropping from the top of the screen. It took a lot of practice, but eventually I started getting to the second phase. In the second phase, I had to kill the pepper shakers in order to make them attack Chef Saltbaker. Luckily, stage 3 was significantly easier with only 1 blade an enemy to avoid. The final phase consists of small moving platforms that I had to traverse while attacking the heart enemy. This phase doesn't really look that hard, but since the distance between platforms is random, it made it really easy to miss a jump and get hurt. And after over an hour and a half of trying to beat this boss, I finally made it to the final phase with 3 health still remaining. This gave me the upper hand that I needed, and I was able to defeat this boss, which gave me the compliments to the Chef achievement. With every boss now defeated, I decided to go back to the King's Leap to beat the rest of the challenges. The first one was pretty fun. It consisted of candles that I had to blow out in order to parry the enemy. After parrying it enough times, I got the knockout. For the next one, I had to parry these heads back at the enemy in order to get the knockout. The last challenge was the Queen, and in order to damage her, I had to parry the cannons at the correct time. After knocking out the Queen, I was rewarded with the Checkmate achievement for defeating all of the King of Games champions. There's an achievement for collecting every coin in the game, and at this point I had almost all of them, so I decided to look for the rest. I just had to go around and collect the rest of the secret coins hidden throughout the world. The first one I was missing was on aisle 2, hidden behind this tram. The next one was on aisle 3, hidden behind the ticket booth. And the last one was behind this wall near the casino. Collecting this coin gave me the High Roller achievement for getting every coin in the game. I went to the shop and bought every single item that I could, which granted me with the Butter and Egg Man achievement for buying everything in Pork Rind's shop. I was really confused though, because there was still one weapon for me to buy and I was missing 1 coin. That's when I figured out that the DLC isn't included in these achievements, so I had to quickly head back to aisle 4 and collect this secret coin hidden behind the mountain. I then went back to the shop to buy Crackshot, and with that, I now have every weapon in the game.
Wow.
The next goal that I set for myself was to S rank every single boss and P rank every run and gun level. In order to get an S rank on a boss, you have to meet the following requirements. Beat the boss on Expert, beat the boss under a certain amount of time, which is usually about 2 minutes, have 3 health remaining at the end of the fight, parry at least 3 times, and use your super meter at least 6 times. I thought it would be fun to make a tier list of how hard I found it to S rank each boss. I wanted to start off easy, so I decided to go all the way back to aisle 1 and work my way through the bosses from there. I started off with Goopy Legrande, which was a walk in the park. Pretty much all I had to do was make sure that I parried all 3 question marks in order to meet the minimum parry requirement. And after getting the knockout, I was granted with the Put on a Show achievement for getting an S rank. I'm going to go ahead and put this boss in D tier, as I was able to get the S rank within 5 minutes. While I was here, I quickly went back and defeated him again, this time using my super art. This granted me with the Porcelain Power achievement for defeating a boss using a super art. The next boss that I S ranked was the Root Pack. Not a whole lot to say about this boss, it was pretty easy, so I'll just go ahead and put it in the D tier. Ribby and Croaks upped the difficulty a bit, especially the final phase where the slot machine shoots coins out way faster. This one gave me a good challenge, so I'll put it in the C tier. Hildeberg was quite a bit more difficult on expert mode due to the increase in projectiles and how close together the UFOs are in the final phase. To give me some help, I used the Heart Ring charm, which gives you an extra hit point after your first, third, and 6th parry. After eventually getting the knockout on this boss, I would place her in the C tier. The last boss on aisle 1 that I have to S rank is Cagney Carnation. While attempting to get the S rank, I got an A, which granted me the Sheriff achievement for getting an A rank or higher on all bosses on aisle 1. And after about another 20 minutes of attempts, I got the S rank. This boss is pretty difficult, but I don't think it's the hardest boss on aisle 1, so I'll place it at the bottom of the C tier. While I was on aisle 1, I figured I might as well P rank the run and gun levels. In order to get a P rank, I have to defeat the level without killing any enemies. Starting off with Treetop Trouble, I carefully made my way through the level. In order to get past the last enemy, I made use of the Invincibility Super Art, which allowed me to safely get to the finish line and obtain the P rank. I used the same strategies for the Forest Follies level, being sure to use my Super Art to avoid getting hurt. I cautiously made my way to the end of the level to receive my P rank. With that, I now have the best possible scores for all of aisle 1, which is super satisfying to see. Moving on to Aisle 2, it was time to get back to S-ranking some bosses. The first one that I tackled was Baroness von Bonbon. It took me over 30 minutes to defeat this boss without getting hit, and I was celebrating what I thought was me getting an S rank, but my heart dropped when I saw that I only got 2 out of 3 parries. And I kid you not, it took an entire extra hour of attempts to finally get the S rank. It probably only took so long because I was tilted, but because of just how infuriating this boss was for me, I'm going to place it in B tier. The next boss I went for was Jimmy the Great. The hardest phase for me was the puppet, as it shoots way faster now that I'm playing on expert mode. I used the heart ring charm, which allowed me to enter the final phase with 4 health. This was the upper hand that I needed, because even though I got hit right before knocking out the boss, I was still able to meet the requirements for an S rank. This boss requires a lot of focus on expert mode, so I'm going to place it in the B tier. Beppy the Clown is up next. I found this boss quite challenging the first time that I fought him, but now that I'm more comfortable with Cuphead's movements and abilities, I was able to get the S rank in about 20 minutes, so I'll place him in the C tier. Next up is none other than Grim Matchstick. The most annoying thing about this boss is the random cloud platforms that make this fight feel like it's more about luck than skill sometimes. I had to be sure to get at least 3 parries in the first phase, because it's the only one that has attacks that I could parry. Whenever I got to the second phase without 3 parries, I had to reset and try again. I pushed through the pain and eventually I got the S rank. This has been the hardest boss to S rank so far, so I'm going to give it a solid B tier. The last boss on Aisle 2 is Wally Warbles. And let me tell you, this boss is super hard on expert. While trying to get an S rank, I got an A, which gave me the boss achievement for obtaining an A rank or higher on all bosses on Aisle 2. After about an hour of attempts, I finally got the S rank. This boss takes way too much mental focus, so I'm going to place it in the A tier. Just like I did on Aisle 1, I'm going to P rank both of the run and gun levels on Aisle 2. First up is Funfair Fever. I used the heart ring charm as well as the invincibility super art to make my way to the end of the level without killing any enemies. I used the same strategies for Funhouse Frazzle and got the P rank without too much trouble. And with that, I now have the best possible scores for all of Aisle 2. Moving on to Aisle 3, I decided to quickly finish up the rest of the run and gun levels. I started off with Rugged Ridge, which had some really tight jumps, but I made my way to the end of the level and got the P rank with just 1 HP left. Perilous Piers was pretty straightforward to beat without killing any enemies. I just had to be patient and careful, and I was able to navigate through the level without taking too much damage. After getting the P rank, I was rewarded with the Pacifist achievement for completing all levels without killing an enemy. I also spoke to Tully the Frog, who unlocked the black and white filter as a reward for P ranking every run and gun level. Pretty cool. With all the run and gun levels done, it's time to start S ranking the Aisle 3 bosses. Starting off with Cala Maria and her super annoying Medusa abilities. Also, the amount of eels that spawn now is absolutely insane and can easily turn into a bullet hell in seconds. This boss can be really tough and feel luck-based at times, so I'm actually going to place this one in the S tier. Next up is Rumor Honeybottoms. The main thing that makes this boss difficult for me is the moving platforms. However, I was still able to get the S rank in just over half an hour, so I'm going to place it in the B tier. Next up is Dr. Cal's Robot. I don't think I really need to give too much information about this one, let's just place it in the S tier and move on. Next up is Sally Stage Play. This boss is pretty standard in my opinion. I made use of the smoke bomb charm to get myself out of any sticky situations, and I was able to get the S rank in no time. I'll place her in the C tier. Captain Burneybeard's attacks are a lot faster in expert mode, which made this boss a decent challenge to S rank. But using the strategies that I developed during my first playthrough, it wasn't too bad, so I'm also going to put him in the C tier. Next up is Werner Warman. I don't have a whole lot to say about this boss. In my opinion, it's the easiest boss on Aisle 3, so I'm going to place him in the C tier as well. The last boss that I have to S rank on Aisle 3 is Phantom Express. While doing attempts, I got an A rank, which gave me the Mayor achievement for getting an A rank or higher on all bosses on Aisle 3. I kept dying during the final phase, which was annoying, because it meant I had to play through the entire boss again just to attempt the final phase. I stuck it out though, and eventually I got the S rank. I'm going to place it in the A tier. And I now have the best possible scores for all of Aisle 3. Next up is King Dice. To make my life easier, I did my best to land on the least difficult mini-bosses. I started off with the poker chips, and then I moved on to the rabbit. I know a lot of people hate this mini-boss, but I think it's really easy to dodge the skull attack when using the smoke bomb charm. And the last mini-boss that I went for was the roulette wheel, who is also super easy to dodge using smoke bomb. I meant to land on the safe space so that I could reach the end, but I accidentally landed on the 8-ball mini-boss. But that's alright since it's a pretty easy fight. With that, all that's left is to defeat King Dice himself. Luckily, I gained an extra hit point and still had full HP after making a mistake and taking a hit. I got the knockout and was rewarded with the Rolling Sixes achievement for defeating King Dice without taking a hit. It's kind of weird that I got this achievement though, because technically I did take a hit. I guess it doesn't matter though, since I still had 3 HP remaining at the end of the fight. I'll place King Dice in the B tier. The time has finally come to face the devil on expert mode. All of his attacks are a lot faster now, making this boss a real challenge. While attempting to get an S rank, I managed to get an A, which granted me 2 achievements at the same time. The first one was for completing the game on expert, and the second was for obtaining an A rank or higher on all bosses in Inkwell Hell. All of the devil's attacks feel fair, but it still took me almost 2 hours of practice to finally get the S rank. Because of that, I'm going to give him a solid A tier. And with that, I now have perfect scores for all of the base game, but I'm not stopping there since it's time to move on to the DLC. The first boss from the DLC that I decided to S rank was none other than the Moonshine Mob. I used Crackshot, which helped me a lot since I was able to focus on avoiding getting hurt. Defeating this boss also gave me the Cooked to Perfection achievement for getting an S rank on a stage of Isle 4. Overall, I didn't find this boss too bad to S rank, so I'm going to place it at the bottom of the B tier. The next boss that I went for was Esther Winchester, and I don't know how I managed it, but I got the S rank in just 15 minutes. I still think this boss is quite challenging despite getting the S rank so fast, so I'm going to put her in the B tier. I was feeling good after that quick victory, and I didn't stop there since I attempted the Hallowing Aces next, and I kid you not that I got the S rank on my second attempt. I did use Crackshot and the Heart Ring, but because of just how fast I got this S rank, I'm going to place it in the C tier. And I should have enjoyed those easier bosses while it lasted, because the next boss is Mortimer Freeze. The first phase is comparable to the regular difficulty, but once the fridge starts attacking, it gets absolutely insane. All of the attacks are way faster, and more enemies spawn at a time. I also kept taking damage from the spikes, since they are a lot closer together now, which I found really difficult to avoid. I honestly think this is one of the hardest bosses in the game to S rank. I struggled with it a lot, so I'm going to place it in the S tier. Next up is Glumstone the Giant. This boss has a lot of enemies that I could parry, so I used the Heart Ring to get 3 extra HP for pretty much free, and this allowed me to get the S rank after only 3 attempts. I really had a hard time deciding where to rank this boss, as I really struggled to beat him on my initial playthrough. But since I was able to get the S rank so easily, I'm going to have to put this boss in the C tier. The final boss that I have to S rank is none other than Chef Saltbaker. Now that I'm fighting him in expert mode, all of his attacks are a lot more punishing. In his first phase, his food attacks appear faster and in greater quantities. There's also 2 fireballs trying to hit me now, making the first phase a lot more challenging. The second phase is more or less the same as the regular difficulty. It just took longer to get through since Chef Saltbaker has more HP now. The third phase doesn't look too hard, but now that there's 2 saw blades instead of 1, it became a lot harder to dodge the bouncing enemy. And the final phase is also difficult as the heart moves a lot faster now. While practicing, I was able to get an A rank, which granted me the Ranger achievement for obtaining an A rank or higher on all bosses on Isle 4. I spent 3 hours trying to get the S rank and was starting to feel tired, so I decided to call it a night and try again the next day. And I guess that was a good idea because I came back refreshed the next day and proceeded to get the S rank in just 15 minutes. This boss is no joke, and it's going straight to the top of the S tier, no questions asked. My tier list is now complete, and I'm really interested to hear what you think of my rankings. And with that, I now have the best possible score for every single boss and run and gun level in the entire game. With that major milestone complete, I moved on to some of the more obscure achievements that I've yet to obtain. The first thing that I did was hop into a boss battle with Miss Chalice. Once I felt like the boss was almost dead, I used my super art to get the knockout. This rewarded me with the Golden Touch achievement for defeating a boss with one of Miss Chalice's super arts. I proceeded to beat more bosses in order to get the Decadent achievement for defeating 10 bosses with Miss Chalice. The next achievement that I want to go for will require the Cursed Relic. The Cursed Relic gives you 1 HP in battle, and it randomly assigns you with a weapon every single time that you press the fire button. While having this equipped, I will have to defeat bosses in order to upgrade the Cursed Relic into the Divine Relic. Once it's fully upgraded, the Divine Relic does not reduce your starting health, and it also gives you the effects of other charms such as the Heart Ring, Smoke Bomb, Coffee, and Whetstone. However, your weapon will still be randomized. I went on to defeat a bunch of different bosses with the relic equipped until I fully upgraded it. Upon defeating the final boss, I was rewarded with the Paladin achievement for obtaining a great power. The next achievement requires me to have 9 health at one time. The easiest way to do this is to equip the Heart Ring and then spin around in circles to summon Jimmy. The genie doubles your HP, and since I have the Heart Ring equipped, I have the maximum amount of hearts possible. Once I hopped into a level and could see that I had 9 hearts, I was rewarded with the Hardy achievement for having 9 HP at one time. The next achievement requires me to defeat a boss using only the mini plane bullets. The easiest plane level that I could find was going to be this King Dice mini boss. I made sure to stay as the small plane for the whole fight, and upon knocking him out, I was awarded with the Bravo Zulu P26 achievement. The next achievement that I'm going to go for requires me to defeat a boss on Aisle 4 without killing any of its minions. I attempted this on Esther Winchester as only her first phase has minions. I carefully made my way through the first phase, and from there all I had to do was make my way to the end of the boss battle. Upon getting the knockout, I was rewarded with the Hi-Hat achievement. I can't believe it, but there's only one more achievement to obtain. I went back to the King's Leap as I had to defeat the Gauntlet. In the Gauntlet, I'll have to defeat all 5 bosses in a row without dying. I quickly made my way through the pawns without too much trouble. Next was the Knight, where I did my best to be patient, and I managed to get the knockout with just 1 HP left. The Bishop was also a close call as I got the knockout with just 1 health remaining again. The 4th boss is the Rook, which is my favorite out of the 5 bosses, and I was able to get the knockout pretty easily. And last but not least is the Queen. I didn't make it this far for nothing, so I focused up and did my best to aim the cannons and avoid taking damage. After getting the knockout and talking to the king, I was rewarded with my final achievement, a King's Admiration. I can't believe I have every single achievement now. While trying to figure out if there's any more content for me to explore, I learned about the Golden Miss Chalice skin. In order to unlock it, I had to defeat every single boss using Miss Chalice, and this didn't take long as I could just play the bosses on simple mode. After defeating all of the bosses and talking to the Cactus Girl, I unlocked Golden Chalice, which looks pretty sweet. I also talked to Silverworth on Aisle 3, who unlocked the 2-tone filter, so I now have all 3 filters that you can unlock in the game. Taking a look at my final stats, it took me 54 hours to 300% Cuphead, and my final death count was 1,236. I had such a blast playing this game and hunting for its achievements. I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't played it yet. Let me know if there's another game that you'd like to see me get all of the achievements for. As always, a super special thank you to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.